So, of course, our topic today is Mr. Tuckman, Tuckman's model, and how to navigate effective team development. So, I know we're on a time crunch, so we'll go pretty quick, but there's going to be time for interaction and questions and stuff like that too, as well. So, I wanted to start with a little bit of the agenda. So, first, why is teamwork important? Who was Bruce Wayne Tuckman? The different stages of Tuckman's model, tips to shift to the next level if you're stuck in one cycle, and then triggering conditions of each stage. And then finally, what's called stage slippage, and then the wrap up. So, a little bit of backstory about me, because this ties in a lot with the fact that I've been on a ton of different teams. So, I was born and raised in Louisiana. I had about 4 years in Texas. My industries, it's been a lot. I graduated in English and journalism, so how I got where I am now is kind of funny, but was in banking, mortgage, disaster recovery, technology, healthcare, education, marketing, and
Oh,
consulting.
wow.
Been involved in the PMP world since 2013. That was bringing me back to disaster recovery, where it was a director who told me that I should study project management. I didn't know what he was talking about. He had to tell me everything about the PMBOK, and he had to coach me out of my imposter syndrome and show me how I was leading teams because I wasn't used to seeing myself through that lens. So was able to get my PMP in 2014. I'm a two-timer. I didn't pass it the first time, so I really had to buckle down and practice the way I studied. Then during the pandemic was when I got the PMI-ACP. So I spent 7 years with one team at PMI Baton Rouge. And for anybody who has ever volunteered for a PMI chapter, we know that managing volunteer teams sometimes is really, it's tough. You learn more there sometimes, I think, than we do at our day jobs. So currently, I'm the director of creative collaboration for both Project Success Academy and Corbo Tech. And this was back at the end of 2024, but some of the fun projects that have exposed me to different teams was I was one of the contributors on the Pure Project Management Alliance. That was spearheaded by Joseph Phillips of instructing.com and Udemy fame. And it was kind of his idea that rather than him doing all the self-recorded courses, he pulled together a collective of project managers who figure out how to record themselves on video and create content. That's a whole story in itself, but I'm amazed I got through it. But that really actually helped me in my role with Project Success Academy. So for Felipe, because I know you're signed up with my communications course, Joseph Phillips' project was where I got the courage
Oh,
to
yeah.
even try and do my own communications course.
Oh,
Uh,
amazing.
it was a wild story, but it's just that journey where you figure it out. Like one thing leads you to another thing, and then you just keep going further incrementally. Same thing with AI. So this year I was a co-author on Project Land Goes to the Movies. That was spearheaded by Dawn Mahan, has a lot of amazing people in the project management space. So my little Hollywood story was leadership in the face of fear, which I used Ripley on the Alien sequel as my heroic woman who's kind of crazy and goes back to managing that project after what she went through before.
Yeah.
And so this is also a team is
Same,
Louisiana
no,
nature.
don't.
Huh?
We met Don Mayhem in Minneapolis.
She is awesome. Like all of these things, I mean, it's just I would have never imagined it before or being part of those teams, but it winds up being really cool opportunities for collaboration, to get to know your network, to build relationships, which that's going to be a very big theme in this, how important building relationships is for business and Tuckman's model.
Definitely.
So teamwork is everywhere, and like a lot of times they tend to have like this one-way view of things where, oh, my team is really just who I work with. Well, no, even when we were little kids, our first team experiences were probably those crazy science fair projects. We all had those, and there's always that one person that wants to do everything, and then there's, I don't know, maybe a couple of others that you're happy to let the one person do everything and one lagging behind. So we see this in adulthood. We've got teams with our family. I mean, if you're ever on a Facebook message for planning a Thanksgiving dinner, it's a whole coordination, project management team process. Your community, your church, your volunteer efforts, even thinking about things like healthcare. My father has had a series of different health scares. So we basically refer to his different doctors as teams because if they're not talking about different things, it might affect one system that could break another. And then, of course, we've got the classic, your work functional teams. So there's a lot of benefits to teamwork. It's better problem solving. I mean, the two heads are better than one. You've got different perspectives where you can look at everything differently. You have faster execution in some instances. There's some instances there's a slowdown, but there's always the flip side and the benefit. You've got stronger creativity because you've got different voices in the room that are exploring multiple angles. And then you have shared ownership, which is great. There's so many days I've got so much on my plate that I'm like, I really need somebody to help me with this. And having somebody on my team that I trust helps the process a lot. So I've always loved this quote: coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is actually a success. So, who was Bruce Wayne Tuckman? So, he was a psychologist and researcher. He introduced the team development stages in 1965, and he acknowledged even back then that teams don't start fully formed. There's this whole journey and process that they go through. So, fun facts: he created a procrastination scale. I haven't looked it up, but like that just kind of appealed to me, and I thought it was kind of ironic and funny. And then he wrote The Long Road to Boston as he was an avid runner.
Mhm.
So now flipping into the meat of the presentation, the forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. So this model is still used. I mean, it's referenced in the PMBOK. It's referenced in a lot of leadership guides. I've even seen it referenced in like ATD books, like Association of Talent Development, SHRM books. They use a lot of the same principles as we do in project management. But the model helps leaders anticipate challenges. I mean, we all know that challenges exist, but sometimes we go on a road trip and we're like, everything's going to be hunky dory and there's going to be no traffic and no stops. And that's just not life. So when you frame things to leaders to help them understand what might happen on your team before it happens, you realize, okay, this puts us in the mindset that we need to resolve conflict early and not let it fester. We need to be much better about defining roles clearly up front, because if we don't, it can lead to these different stages. And then we also have to realize we're going to have to wear different leadership hats at different times. Like my go-to personality is usually warm, collaborative, and welcoming. But I've had different roles. I mean, I had a safety officer role in a very, very, very large building, and we were kind of under fire from Office of Risk Management. So the normally nice collaborative Tanya turned into the no, you will not daisy chain those things. No, you need to get that mini refrigerator out there and you need to do it by this day. So not that that style is needed all the time, but like it's just realizing we're going to have to familiarize ourselves as leaders with personalities, different types, and how to navigate that. So, interesting insights about the model. The team cycles through stages, changes. Any slight interruption can disrupt where you are and set you back. Emotional intelligence, learning about that emotional intelligence, having self awareness for yourself, and encouraging other people to engage in constructive feedback. Not always toxic positivity, not always negative, but like realistic. Let's talk about this. And having that emotional intelligence helps things. And even the storming stage, when people are battling, sometimes it actually leads to different breakthroughs that we didn't expect. So forming. Forming is that first stage where the team is getting introduced, there's introductions, there's orientations. It's kind of the beginning of the team starting to understand how they fit into the picture and understanding their roles and goals. Most people, when they're forming, are on their best behaviors. Usually, somebody doesn't come in starting the conflict. They're being very nice, but they're also kind of gauging where everybody else is and learning the playing field. So, a lot of times in those initial stages, there's still some uncertainty that's bubbling beneath the surface. So, different ways to shift past that, or different ways to, I guess, do that warm welcome to start getting new people acclimated. Personal introductions. I'll use an example where I was on a mid-sized healthcare company. I had to onboard remotely in June of 2020. So it's weird. It was going pick up my laptop in a parking lot and then coming back and setting myself up at my desk. But I got to connect with each one of the members of the PMO on a one-on-one, and during those times, we really didn't go through the process training. It was just more that get to know you informally.
Mm.
And then we move along, to the more formal process. And I felt like that helped. It was almost like water cooler introductions, but flash forward to remote work. And so there's informal connection moments. This was something, and I'm going to use that same company as an example. We were all remote. So I was on a 5-person PMO team, but there were 70 people in IT, because we were an IT PMO. And one thing that the CEO did that I really, really loved was every Friday they'd have happy hour. I mean, it wasn't happy hour, but it was like happy coffee chat. So we'd get together. It was not serious discussion. We talked about what we were barbecuing or cooking that weekend because Louisiana, we're all about the food. We had one meeting where the theme was, if you had a walk-up song, what would it be? I chose Peter Gabriel's Steam. I've always had mad love for that song, and it's just very energetic, and just give me steam. So that was fun, and it gave you a different lens to see your coworkers. And then just collaborative and creative engagement. We do, and I've done this at different places where we have little competitions. I mean, I remember at bank that I worked at way back in the day, it was sectored between men and women. Banks had something called CAP. CAP meant value of a product to the bank. And so, they put me in charge of one of the skits and they got baby got cap out of me. But it was a lot of fun, so just creating those times where the team can share levity, laugh, potlucks, all great exercises for the forming and throughout the entire thing. Now, storming kind of enters the picture at different times. I mean, it doesn't necessarily sequentially follow norming. And this is the one that I find a lot of teams spend time in, revert back to. But there's several reasons for it. I mean, it's conflicting priorities. That could track back to the roles are not clearly aligned. It could track back to there's too many things going on and the team is not doing a good enough job of sizing and estimating the work and the time that it takes to do it. So they're putting too much on the plate. And while some of the team can multitask really well, we all know that much multitasking and bouncing back and forth can lead to burnout, lack of quality assurance. So that leads into misaligned expectations. We need to start being really clear on what it is that we want in our projects, how to measure it, what defines success. And I know that's not an immediate process. I mean, it winds up being incremental because we don't always get it right the first time, but it's important to keep working at it. And then those testing boundaries. I mean, I've had that with different personality types. I've seen a lot of passive aggressiveness. I've seen a lot of people when there's a problem, they just retreat and they won't tell you what's going on. So you have a lot of trouble digging down to get what you need to move it forward. And then there's power struggles. I see the power struggles a lot. I think I saw them the most in very large healthcare, in very matrixed environments, because you've got people over different divisions, which is naturally leading to competing priorities, and different entities thinking my project is more important than your project and it not being managed correctly. And then just suppressed uncertainty. I mean, think about where we are now. Think about, you know, past couple of years, all the layoffs, the reality that we are facing that a lot of companies are going all in on AI and getting rid of many of the humans. So we've all got like our swirling bucket of fears, uncertainty, not sure if we're on the chopping block, not sure when we're going to land the next gig. So all of those different factors can lead to storming on a team. And sometimes it's just maybe people are going through things at home or personally that they're not saying out loud that's impacting how they behave and how they perform. So different ways to move through storming. And I know that these are very general on the screen, but again, it's thinking through these constantly. You know, how do I address conflict early? I used to be the person that I didn't want to ruffle any feathers. I was scared to ruffle feathers. I was scared to hurt somebody's feelings. I was scared to address the problem. And then, like, after several years, I realized that that just wasn't working very well for me. That was getting me absolutely nowhere. So I had to start learning to dig deep within myself to go, well, how do I address this conflict, but nicely and diplomatically, where I don't put this other person on defense? How do I learn different language to frame this situation to not oust them, but to get them on my side and get them to work together to really get to the bottom of this? And then just even inviting perspectives. I mean, those situations where maybe you're the leader and people aren't in conflict with you, but you have two team members that are in conflict with one another and are catfighting, but you need these people to actually get along and respect one another and figure out how to play well together. So even just inviting different perspectives on how would you do this? What do you see that we could do to do this better? And then just creating that safe space for consensus. And that drives to focusing on the resolution. So when conflicts are happening, rather than pointing fingers or scapegoating or blaming or saying, you did this, you didn't do that, you dropped the ball, this person did this, just say, okay, we're here now. This is where we get to. Let's figure out how we all come together on this and move this to the next stage. So norming. And like I said, I am going to leave more time at the end for conversation. Normally I do kind of in the middle of this, but I just want to make sure we're on time with everything. But the norming phase is when the trust increases. Maybe this is when you're getting to know your team members better outside of just the roles, and you're picking up on what their skills are. Every team I go on, it's a journey of realizing, okay, maybe this isn't this person's role, but they're actually really good at this, or they're very creative, or they're very perceptive. And they picked up a signal that I absolutely would have missed. So this is that stage where you start seeing the good in your other team members and maybe even doing a little bit of skill share so you can both learn from one another. But the communication improves, the roles start feeling a little bit clearer, and then conflicts resolve a little bit faster. So different ways to strengthen the norming phase, that peer learning, like AI, this is perfect. And so people just use the word AI. There's so many different flavors of AI. And there's so many different trainings on AI, and they're all different. I haven't gone to one that is exactly the same, and it's realizing that we're all at different levels in that journey because none of us can keep up with the pace that technology changes constantly. But just carving out those instances for peer learning like this, talking about different topics, asking people to come in and share their knowledge, and then even shared decision making rather than just one person calling the ball. And I'll give Ben a lot of credit for this. Ben, that I work with, Ben Webeski, he is very good about this. I know that he can call the ball, but like he really seriously wants to encourage everybody to share their reflection on things. And if we're stuck and we can't come to a consensus, he'll call it, but he at least shares that space of asking people, what do you think? What would you do here? Clear goals. Again, a lot of times circumstances change. So, what was a clear goal 5 minutes ago, an obstacle may have come up in your course, so your goal shifts. But it's always trying to navigate and work towards that clarity. And then constructive feedback. I try to get better about this too, where there's times people knock it out the park, and I'm like, what could I possibly tell them to help them improve to get better? But it's like I'm trying to work on that, even if I think somebody's stellar. And it's not, you almost have to watch the people because some will think, oh, you just had to throw in a nitpick. But it's like, no, it's not that. I actually want to know too, for me, like, okay, you did this great, but you were staring off into outer space, or you were rambling, or just giving people feedback incrementally to help them grow, I think is a good practice. So performing this picture, I mean, I feel like, there's some teams I've never seen quite get to the performing phase. I mean, or if it is, it's very short on a certain project for a certain span, and then things happen again. But I always think of doctors. I was like, if you're in the middle of heart surgery or brain surgery, you have really got to have a lot of invested trust in that team to know what they're doing. And so in something like this, there's very, very, very clear ownership of who does what on what role. There's an openness towards creative solutions and talking about different ways of working and exploring and experimenting with new things. There's transparent communication. And then there's that confidence in execution. So, different ways to sustain performance, because a lot of times reaching that high level of consciousness requires so much energy, so much discipline, and so much commitment. So as a leader and as a person, so leaders over our team monitor the energy, also with ourselves. And I have to do this constantly because I will get myself into a million different modes. But I have to monitor my energy and go, I can do all of these things, but I have to like backlog that. Like example, I had to tell Dr. Tony, I'm going to get to the capstone probably next week because I have got something that's got a deadline that until I get it out my brain and done, I have to get that. I have to do my day job and I've got to get that done, and then just reinforcing the purpose with the team. That's celebrating the wins, not at the end, but throughout, cheerleading one another, championing one another, giving the shout outs, just being gracious with your feedback to your team. And then even the encouraging reflection, going, okay, so we didn't hit the goal this month. What worked well? What do we feel like we did great? And okay, we didn't quite hit this, but what could we have done better? What will we do next time? How do we need to manage this in the future to keep ourselves at norming or performing more? And then just preventing burnout. Again, that high level performance, it takes a toll on us. I've never been one to all work and no play. If y'all are my LinkedIn, y'all know how much I play because I'm silly. I will put it out there. But I think having that moment of rest and play and enjoyment is what we need as functioning professionals. We all work very hard. We've got to cut ourselves some slack sometimes and be able to live our lives as well. So adjourning, sometimes this is the skipped phase. So that's the project closure. That's where the lessons learned are documented. And then the celebrating with the team and releasing them for other duties. I've been on projects that didn't close. One of them was the Louisiana Road Home. It was disaster recovery. I think there's a formation of it that is still going 20 years after Hurricane Katrina, like a little bit that's still monitoring and not completely closed. But that was wild. That project set the stage for my career. It also set the stage for what New York and New Jersey did after Hurricane Sandy, what Galveston did after Hurricane Ike, what Puerto Rico did. It's all of that is still very much modeled off of the baseline that was set right after Katrina. So now we can tell I flipped to where some of this presentation was built in 2021. So y'all can tell the same theme throughout. This was a little bit newer with Notebook LM, but I wanted to go through some of the reasons for regression. And they all make total sense, but I had to list it out. So it can be a new hire, somebody new's in the mix. There's a promotion. I have experienced the weirdness of going from a team collaborator to a leader and noticed that will shift people's perception of you, their behavior towards you for whatever reasons. They put on a different lens when they view you. Resignations can cause a shift, layoffs, even temporary absences. Things like when people get the flu, COVID, even out for 3 days, something happens, family things, all of these cause different shifts in teams. And then there's cultural and conflict. It could be an unclear vision, fear of job loss. So they just stop doing as much and are just kind of operating a little bit apathy and just like maybe a bit above. Cultural differences. I've seen that before. My biggest instance of that was on the Louisiana Medicaid Systems Modernization Project. We went from 70 to 700 people. We had a lot of contractors from Deloitte. There were a lot of people, that were from different parts of the country, and just watching how people adapted to one another and treated one another and talked to one another. I saw a lot of just dissension there. Generational gaps, that's all of the talks, all of the Z talks is the rage right now. Personality clashes, so the list goes on. I mean, mergers and acquisitions, they're going to bring their people in, reorganizations, role changes, vendor contracts, and then just even your operational changes in the ways of working. How much AI is being put on us at once to learn on top of our heavy processes, our tolerances towards risk, and then competition. So it's a whole mix. But things we all have to keep in check. Work, pay the bills, our health. If we don't have our health, we are not as productive at work. If we start dipping too much and losing balance, it's going to throw one of these levels off. And then even with work is different from career. A lot of people with the layoffs wound up having to just get a job at a different level, but that is not ultimately their career vision. And then our families. And then I'm nearing the end, but I just want y'all to know that, and I mean, all teams that I talk to, because a lot of times people are like, why are we in this? And they feel like they are the only team that's going through it. And I'm like, no, I've worked with so many different teams. This is like actually totally, totally, totally normal. But It happens. Teams are going to toggle between different stages as new circumstances present themselves. And to me, the best mindset is literally just to focus forward. Always have that growth mindset, even when you're tired. I mean, I know there's days that I get so tired with team dynamics. I'm like, I'm going to sleep tonight. And I'm not thinking about this until tomorrow. I'm done. But just wake up the next day and go, okay, tomorrow is a new day. I've reset myself. I'm okay. And I think I can go back to